All right. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Existential Stoic Podcast. This is episode 55. Don't fail like the government. So today, I'm Danny. I'm here with my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Hey, Danny. Yeah, they do a great job of failing big, and
Yeah, they fail big and they fail hard and they fail all the time. It's
they
amazing.
knock it out of the park. But
What?
today's episode, we're going to talk about how to actually fail in a good way, and we're going to look
Yeah,
at some examples of how the government has not really done it in a good way.
yeah. It's funny. What was it like? I think it was like 2 years ago. I remember reading that like the congressional members had worked a total of 98 days or something in the year. I was like,
Hardworking,
man, that's a hell of a job, right? Because they spend
yeah,
all the rest of the time out campaigning constantly, right? Raising
yeah,
money. It's like, and it's just like this constant perpetual failure at dealing
yeah.
with anything.
It is. It definitely is interesting times that we live in because I don't exactly know how it was because I wasn't alive back then, but I hear like back before Watergate and Vietnam, people really trusted the government. They believed what they said. They thought they were working in their best interest. Now it's like you politicians are just politicians and used car salesmen are pretty much just
Yeah.
known liars. That's it.
Well, and my history's not great, but I think it was like, especially like the World War II era to like, basically the 60s, there was that really strong trust. But I think also at that time, the news media didn't report on like a lot of things. Like a lot of things were left, untouchable because it was about the person's life, it was about this and that. So like, we have a way different approach, I think, too, where like if you're a politician, your life is open, right? They're gonna find everything. And that wasn't the case back then. So I think, it was probably the same people, but like different times, right? As they say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think failure is something we all struggle with because I think, and we talked about this before, but I think a lot of it is, education. This idea that to be a success, you can never fail. You have to be perfect all the time. You have to always do it right the first time. There's no second chances. Honestly, our education really is the worst preparation for life because like none of it applies once you
Yeah.
get in the real world. But if you think it applies, it screws you all up.
Oh yeah, totally. And the shame of it is, I think the intention behind it is good.
Oh yeah,
Like it's not only the education system. Oftentimes it comes down to like interactions and relationships that we have in our families where we get scolded for failing, making mistakes, breaking something, whatever it is. And that makes us avoid failure and maybe not tell the truth about it. And so we learn all these things at a very young age, and then we kind of carry them with us through life until we can make a decision ourselves to address it and to grow from it.
no, I'm glad you made that point too, right? Because it's imperfect people trying to make the best situation for their offspring, and that anxiety, the pressure of the world, all of that probably adds into it, I'm sure. Yeah,
Dude, I
but
can
why?
only
Yeah.
imagine because
Oh God.
I like like trying to work, run a business, do stuff like that. I don't have kids, but I go around and kids are just running around, yelling, screaming, all this
Oh
stuff,
God.
and I'm like, thank God they're not my kids. I can only imagine what it was like for my parents to come home from like a busy day of work and then have to deal with all that stuff. No wonder.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to deal with it, right? Because you got no choice in that case. So it is. Yeah, I couldn't imagine. It's I guess in this sense too, like failure and mistakes. So many people do avoid them, but like why shouldn't we? Why should
Okay,
we maybe go towards them rather than
so
away?
yeah, so let's look at it like a lot. I think a lot of the times the government tries to like cover up things, like especially nowadays. Like
Oh
nowadays,
God, yeah,
thinking that you can cover up anything is ridiculous. But
yeah.
like trying to brush stuff under the carpet, thinking that nobody will notice, and just not addressing it. That's that's not a very responsible way to take on life.
Well, they're talking about a government shutdown again, right? With the debt ceiling, and it's like the same thing happens. It seems like every year, right? Where they just keep kicking the can down the road rather than actually addressing the problem and being like, all right, let's actually fix this. Instead, we just keep kicking that can,
Well,
further and
because
further.
they're like I got another 2 years of my term. I don't want this to completely fall apart while I'm in office. That'll tar my reputation. Let's
Yeah.
kick it down to the and that's a problem because like nobody wants to accept responsibility. And I think that it can also come back to ourselves in a way because like we all like to blame the government for not doing things right, whatever. But really, in the end of everything, it all comes down to ourselves. So how much do we accept responsibility? Like when we mess up. I remember last year when I was working as a vet, like there were a couple times where I messed up, and it was difficult. But like actually
Yeah,
going to my boss and saying, no, this was like I messed up. Like this was me. I
yeah,
didn't do the right thing here. That was definitely me. Like one, it was very difficult, and I felt very like insecure about doing that. But at the same time, he gained a lot of respect for me for doing that because he knew that I was telling the truth.
yeah,
That's the
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Well, that's just it, right? You took responsibility for your mistake. You learn from it way better when you do that. You also acknowledge it instead of, when you kick the can down the road, or when you try and push it under the rug, right? You're lying to yourself. You're denying it. You never really admit it, and you're likely to make the same mistake again. Case in point, look at the government. Right? And I think it's interesting because it's that idea of responsibility is I think key here, right? That we're being responsible for ourselves, taking responsibility for our own lives. And it's funny when you mentioned that. I was thinking, I teach environmental ethics a lot, and every time I teach that class, right, it's like, we all recognize the problems of climate change, we all recognize the problems of pollution, but it's like nobody does anything. And it's like everybody has the same excuse, right? Oh, it's the corporations. Oh, it's the government. And it's like, well, okay, maybe they do play a big role, but like we also have some agency, we have some efficacy. And if we actually do things ourselves, we can make a difference. But it's pretending that we can't, to sort of, take that burden, that pressure off, and letting those mistakes and failures just keep adding up, right? But not acknowledging them or admitting to them. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we each accumulate a lot of trash throughout our lives and use a lot of plastics and don't bring bags back to the grocery stores. Like all these things add up, and I don't think we actually realize the total effect of all of that.
Yeah.
So but one thing that I wanted to mention, so like we talk about how the government isn't great at addressing failure. However, if we look
Yeah.
at a branch of the government, the military, okay, so like I think that they handle failure very well. Like I think they train for it and they actually realize that it's going to happen. So like there's that whole saying, improvise, adapt, overcome.
Yeah.
So like basically the idea of just a cycle of failure, how you try the best option. If it fails, you try the next best option. If it fails, you try the next best option. And then they have all the discipline and everything. So like I think that's kind of interesting how that little branch of the government, whatever it may be, uh, that seems to do very well with failure.
Well, it
Whereas,
makes sense.
whereas,
They're in situations, right, where you have to keep going. And I think that's the important thing, right? If you're in a war, if you're in a situation like a natural disaster, even where you have like the National Guard called out, they can't just, oh, this didn't work. Let's go home, right? Or like,
Plan A
let's call
failed,
it a
we're
day.
done.
Yeah, right. Oh, this didn't work, but hey, it's the holiday break. We'll be back in 40 days. It's like they can't do that. So I think that's a good example too of, like in our own lives, right? Like Kierkegaard said it, where he said, like whether you choose or not, time keeps going, life keeps going, right? And it's just gonna go. And you have to make a choice, you have to do things. And I think that's a crucial point. You have to act. And so mistakes and failures are just a part of life. They're a part of that process. And it's a part of learning too, I think, what we're good at, what we're capable of, what we should be doing. All of that is actually like those mistakes and failures in our lives add up to, really a ton of information and knowledge about ourselves, about the world around us, and about how we can best effectively act in that world. I think that's like,
Well, that's a great point. So like we talk about how the government doesn't really address their failures, but we can address our failures. So
yeah.
how can we actually address, because everybody gets to those points in their life. Like for me, student debt was that area for a long
Oh
time. Like that
God,
was the
right?
biggest
Yeah.
failure of my life. I went to like, growing up, I was either a doctor, a lawyer, or a failure. So I chose doctor. And then once I graduated school, I had a big student loan burden to
Yeah.
go along with that. And so that becoming the success brought along with it this whole huge failure that I had to carry along with me. And for a long time, I tried to like ignore it, avoid it, just be like, eventually I'll make enough money to make it go away or something like that. And, but it really took a turning and addressing it to gain any type of good feeling in that area.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that too, actually, because I was thinking about that the other day. My own education, right? Where like, I chose to go into academia at a time when, after 2008 and stuff, it just got worse and worse, and it's not a really a good career choice right now at all, especially in the humanities, which is the area that I'm in. And like a lot of times I look at it like, was that a failure that I did that I made those choices. Now, at the time, I didn't know what was going to happen so far in the future, and that's one of the difficulties of college. But I think one of the things I did was, yes, I felt jaded and upset about it, and like it was a failure for a while. But then I looked at the situation and I asked myself, well, what did I gain? What actually did I get out of it? What value did I get out of it? And how can I start applying that in a direction that betters things rather than, because I think this is our biggest thing is when we don't face failure, we tend to give up or we tend to deny it. And we tend to just, like you said, you kind of ignore it and try and move on. But the problem is still there, right? It's still hovering on your shoulders. It's still that monkey on your back. But when you face it, you can start to then sort of course correct and still recognize, I enjoyed my time in school very much. I think I got a lot of value out of it that is useful now. So it's like when I look at it that way, you can kind of turn those failures also into successes. And I think that's the important thing.
Yeah, and each failure brings with it the seed for a similar size or greater success. So like recognize what you were saying, going back and seeing the seeds of success there and kind of the diamonds in the rough, actually taking a look at that, because a lot of times it's easy to just gloss over and be like, oh, I didn't get anything from it, now it's terrible and whatever, but actually see the benefit from it, because like even though the student debt was pretty terrible, it made me figure out that I had to go into business for myself, and that kind of turned out pretty well. So like a lot of things, they don't work out exactly how you want, and if you stop, you definitely end up failing. But if you keep going, may not be failure.
Well, I think that's the thing too, right? Like you just said it right there. Things will not work out like you want. Nothing's going to work out ideally, and you have to keep changing your plan. But I think like you said, right, with school, like that might have been a mistake, but you probably got a lot of good lessons in time management, in what you can accomplish, just what you're capable of. And that I think is, that's a lesson to learn anyway. So it helps us move forward and take those mistakes. And also the other side of that too is you only fail once you stop. I mean, once you stop trying, you've effectively failed. I think we make this mistake of counting every roadblock, every obstacle as a failure, when in fact it's not. And since this is the Existential Stoic podcast, I thought I mentioned, because like a lot, I saw the other day, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations are super popular, right? A lot of people love that book, and it's a great work. It's like his journal entries, effectively, right? But even in that, admittedly, Marcus Aurelius was a great Stoic, very intelligent, very brilliant ruler, very, great character, great virtues. But if you look at that work, you see him struggle with the same problems over and over again and not succeeding necessarily, right? Like having to go back and be like, oh, wait, I didn't get this right the first time, or this problem's still bothering me. I'm still struggling with this. What do I need to do? And I think it's a great example of, not giving up, but keep working on ourselves, keep practicing, keep figuring out new approaches, new ways to sort of either, achieve those virtues or achieve that life that you want.
And I think that's using him as an example is great, because a lot of people are under the false impression that as soon as they're famous or they're wealthy, or as soon as they have this one thing, that all of a sudden all problems go away, life is a piece of cake, it's whatever. And, especially with money, everybody's like, well, once I have a lot of money, then it'll be easier. And it's like, yeah, certain things will be easier, but in the end, you're still going to have problems. It's still going to be all this crazy stuff. Because Marcus Aurelius, he was a Roman emperor. So he was like one of the richest people back then. He was one of the most famous people back then. And he still struggled with these problems over and over and over again.
And it's funny too, in his position, he didn't have to. He could have chose to approach life very differently. But he had an idea of what he wanted to be. And he wanted, that was necessary for him to live a good life. And I think that's important because, we talked about, you mentioned before, like Jim Carrey, when he said like, oh, I wish everybody got all the fame and all the money they wanted. So they realized that's not the answer, right? It solves some problems, of course, when you're struggling financially, but it doesn't make you a better person. It doesn't make life instantly better. It doesn't cure depression. It doesn't cure anxiety. Like all those things are you. And I think that's why Marcus Aurelius is also a good example, because he was the emperor. He could have done whatever the hell he wanted. But, he also recognized, I think, that a good life came from also being a good person and working on himself, because he was still in all of those situations. He brought himself with him. Like we can't lose ourselves.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. Wherever you go, there you are. Because
Yeah.
I've traveled all over the place, and like when I was young, I thought that like, oh, once I go to this place, then like
Oh
my
God,
problems
yeah.
will be gone. And then I get
Yeah.
there, and I realize I'm there with me, and I'm like, what is going on?
It's funny. It's like, you associate all your problems with the place, and you're like, if I just get away from there, be great. And you get away, and yeah, it's like, oh shit, I am still me. Damn it.
Yep.
I didn't
Yeah,
change. Yeah, it is
yeah.
funny.
But talking about change, because like change is an inherent part of life, but we're also talking about don't fail like the government. And a lot of times, I think that a lot of governments and like large organizations' problems is their inability to change, staying
Oh yeah.
stuck, doing the same thing over and over again because that's the way it's always been done. Like, so,
Or
so how
we're
can
changing so slowly, right? Like, I mean, like, you know, changing so
Mhm.
slowly, reacting to the time so slowly that you end up putting yourself far behind and being outdated or antiquated. Yeah.
how can we use that aspect of not failing like the government to improve our lives, change?
And I think on the one hand, it's just recognizing, like you said, change is a part of life. I mean, in fact, I wouldn't consider a life good if it didn't include change, right? You wouldn't want a static existence.
Well,
I think that's,
everybody wants the good changes. They
yeah,
want to win the lottery. They want to get the trophy spouse. They want to have the perfect kids, and like all these perfect things. But
yeah,
on the other hand, they don't want the bad changes. They don't
yeah.
want to get older. They don't want to get sick. They don't want to lose their money. They don't want to lose their house. And so, like, how do we kind of balance that stuff? And we spoke a little bit about this when we had a couple Stoics on, interviewing them, talking about
Yeah.
things in our control. Um,
Well, I think, if you look at virtue ethicists, right, whether we're talking about the Stoics or Aristotle or even Epicurus, I mean, really Plato, I think one of the things they all mention that's important is, the focus on character is not just necessarily about becoming a good person, but it's also when you focus on yourself, when you focus on self control, those things that happen in the world, those changes that happen, you're better equipped to deal with it. You're better equipped to handle new situations, new changes, misfortune or fortune in a healthy way. And it's not going to rock the boat so much, because I think most of us, right? If we won the lottery, if a natural disaster happened, it's like this like roller coaster with these huge peaks and valleys, right? Where life is going up and down. But I think if you have a good character, it's more like just a rolling hill, where it's like, oh, there might be some ups and some downs, but you stay stable throughout it. You have that
'cause-
control. And
yeah, because they can't take the gift. Like the person that you become in achieving this better life, you get to. It's the same thing. Wherever you go, there you are. You get to
yeah.
take that person with you. Like whether you have the millions of dollars or none of it, you still get to be that same person. And yeah.
Well, that's just it, right? It's like, when Aristotle talked about finding the golden mean, right? Finding that middle area, that's virtue, because the extremes bring us to extreme states and a lack of self-control. And I think to speak in more contemporary terms, right, it all comes down to agency and intentionality. It's being able to direct our lives, not letting, when we talk about, the areas of control, what's in our control, a lot of times it's also, how do we respond to those things? How are we responding to external stimulus? I think, when Massimo was on, he mentioned the example of like his fridge breaking, right? And like you could freak out, you could panic. You can also just sit down and say, okay, look, this is out of my control. What can I actually do? What do I have the power to do to make this situation better right now? And or what's within my capacity to make this better? If I'm in a situation where there's, high emotions, first of all, I can not respond. I can take a moment, I can breathe, I can calm down, I can leave the room. I have lots of things that I can do. I can't change the people, I can't change the world, but I can do a lot of things to make sure that I don't respond in a way that's not the type of person that I want to be, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And one other thing that I've really liked is kind of the garbage in, garbage out mentality.
Oh yeah.
So like I like to always keep feeding my mind with positive things, like read positive stuff, listen to motivational stuff, just and read biographies of very successful people, because it's just like these little phrases that you get in your mind. Whereas like a lot of people, when a bad thing happens to them, first thing they think is, oh, of course it happened to me, or like
Yeah. Yeah.
F my life, or like all these different things. Whereas opposed to like if you're constantly feeding yourself with good material, then like something bad happens, you're like, okay, that's its nature, it breaks, but you know what, whatever comes I can handle it. So like, yeah, feeding
Well,
yourself
no,
good stuff.
I like that too, because look, the fact is we are human beings, right? The world is change. We are going to make mistakes. We are going to fail along the way in our lives. There's no getting around that. So I think you're right. Putting those good things in a sense, it like sort of fortifies you. It makes you more capable. It gives you that mental energy and strength to deal with those things when they come. And I think this is also one of our problems, that most of us, we don't think about focusing on our mental health, on our character. We don't think about our positivity. And so we lack that sort of psychic energy to deal with situations when they happen. So we run away, we hide under a rug, we ignore it, we deny it, we claim the victim, right? Instead of seeing what we can do, and instead of actually embracing the changes and embracing the mistakes.
I mean, just look, everybody wants to be famous, and just look at all the famous people with bad characters, you
Oh
know?
God, yeah. And they're miserable. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. So it's, it takes, you know, you kind of have to live a life different than other people. You know, like so, a lot of
yeah.
people, you know, sometimes people tell me like, you don't think like other people, and I'm like, thank goodness I don't. You
Whew,
know,
good.
yeah,
Yeah,
I know other
thank
people are
God.
broken, like miserable. It's like I don't want to think like other people.
No.
So, but it's kind of what you mentioned earlier with the intentionality and the agency, because like I okay, so I truth be told, I've downplayed this book a number of times on the channel, just because I'm like, how can you quit being a monk at 30? But
Yeah.
I actually started listening to the book, and it's a surprisingly good book. So think like a monk, surprisingly good
Just
book.
because he's not a monk doesn't mean he doesn't necessarily know how to think like one.
Right. Right. And so there's a lot of good stuff that I got from the book. But like, you know, monks, when they get to the place, they like to compete with each other. And like he's like, as a monk, really the only good competitions you can have is who can be more loving and more respectful. And then also I was talking about agency and intentionality with life, but I don't remember where. So we'll come back
Yeah.
to that later.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. It's funny too. I think a lot of it too with mistakes too, and you know, not failing like the government, but failing like a person who's going to be successful and do well in life. I think a lot of it too is just, I think so much of us struggle with this because we just don't know how to just deal with our mistakes like an adult in a way, like a mature person. And we're afraid of failure. But, I think like you had mentioned reading biographies and stuff, right? When you look at other people's lives that were successful or that you admire, you can see in their lives, especially biographies that are good, all the mistakes they made. And not even all of them, just some of them, just some of the big ones. Yet they still got to where they were. And it's like, I think, we always have this idea that we're going to be, maybe it's we think we're going to be judged by something and not our whole lives. When you look at a whole life, every life includes mistakes, failures, errors, but it's what you do with them, and it's how you sort of, it's like what you do afterwards that matters. I think that's the crucial thing. And when we fear them, they just become all these obstacles and roadblocks in our way that ultimately stunt our growth and ultimately limit our development. When we embrace them, they become, essentially a new path to self-realization, to what we can do. What are we capable of? Nietzsche always refers to self-overcoming, right? When you're faced with obstacles, finding a way to overcome yourself. What skills do I need? How do I need to develop? What mental attitude do I need? What willpower do I need to get through this? And then I'm that much better on the other side. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think also part of it comes to just telling the truth. Like
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I grew up in an environment where I was scared to tell the truth because, like when I was young, if I broke something, I got in trouble, and I was scared, and going to school, if I got caught doing something, I'd get in trouble, and I was scared. So like it was easier for me to not tell the truth than to actually tell the truth and take whatever repercussions came from it. So like
You know,
it wasn't until I got older where I actually had some relationships where I could tell the truth no matter what. Like even if the other person got hurt, even if it was what they didn't want to hear, I could still tell the truth. And it was like such a liberating activity because all of a sudden there was nothing left to fear. And I think getting to that spot with failure, like realizing that it's okay to fail. Like,
yeah, it is.
like if, for instance, like if Bill Gates comes up to you and tells you that his first two companies went belly up and he lost everything he has, are you really going to care? No,
Yeah,
no.
I
But
don't
like
think he cares.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But like, like even Elon Musk, like he's one of the most popular guys right now, and he was literally a hair's breadth away from going under. Like after he sold PayPal while he was working on Tesla and SpaceX, they were literally like a week or so from running out of money, going bankrupt, closing. And so like if he told that to people would be really inspired. They
Yeah.
wouldn't really judge him. So the block that we have with failure is something that we kind of have to get over on our own.
I mean, I think those are good examples too. Because think about it with SpaceX, right? If that first rocket that didn't do well, which it didn't, right? If they just said, "Oh, it didn't work that time," oh well, it's like like what kind of approach would that be? It's like you're trying to send rockets into space. It's probably going to take a while, right? There's you almost like I think that's what we miss a lot of times. It's like these large projects, failure is built into the model of success, right? Like because like, okay, it's probably going to fail, but we're going to learn a lot from it, and we're going to be able to correct those things, and the next one maybe we'll do a little better. It might not work, but it'll do better, and we keep doing that. And I think that's the mentality we need: is that okay, it didn't work, but I can do better, and I can keep doing a little better, and then eventually it'll work, right?
But you know that saying, if at first you don't succeed, try again.
Yeah,
I
yeah, that's a good one.
I mean, because it's like a saying that a lot of people know, and it's like, yeah, you
Yeah.
don't give up. Well, like oftentimes whenever friends of mine will like fail at something, I'll be like, well, you know what they say, if at first you don't succeed, you should just quit.
Yeah, just give up. It's easiest.
Yeah.
But, it's funny too. I'm glad you mentioned truth because I was thinking about that as well. Like um, one of Nietzsche always like sort of he talks about honesty as the most important virtue, and like especially honesty with yourself. Like starting there, can you be truthful with yourself? And I think a good practice for this too is like again, journaling is awesome because nobody else has to see it, but you can get it out in the world. Like try being brutally honest with yourself and writing things down. And that is a great place to start because once you start being honest with yourself, you can start admitting things and you can start looking at your successes and failures very differently. I think it helps us sort of see ourselves correctly. And also, like you said, take responsibility for things, start living intentionally rather than letting the world sort of dictate everything, rather than being like, sort of like just a stick getting carried by the stream, I guess. This would be a good metaphor.
Yeah, definitely. Because we live with a lot of illusions. Like many things we know the answer to, we know how to do it. We just may not want to, or we keep deceiving ourselves and then not actually doing it. So some things that just come to mind are like, being healthy, weight loss, that type of stuff, finances, good relationships. Like it's not going to boggle anyone's mind to have the answer to that stuff. Like
No.
trying to lose weight, like eat right. And maybe
Yeah.
if you want to exercise a little, like, is anybody's mind blown? I don't think so. Or like finances.
That's how you do it.
I know. Or it's like finances, budget and spend less than you earn. Anybody's mind blown? Don't think so. Relationships, communicate, make it a priority. Anybody's mind blown? I don't think so. But like, because we deceive ourselves, like what you were saying is you need to be honest with yourself. And a lot of us just continually deceive ourselves thinking that the answer lies outside of what we already know or outside of us. Or if we just get into that other relationship, then this fifth marriage will work. The other four, it was all my wife's fault. But this fifth marriage is going to be the one. So like,
well, you nailed it right there too, right? When we're not honest with ourselves, that's what we do too, especially, and relationships are a great place to look at it, right? When things go wrong in a relationship, most people are like, it's the other person's fault. They did everything. They suck. They misread the situation. It's like, dude, if you're honest with yourself, you definitely were at least 50% of it. Like you were there. So it's like, you could have done things differently. And I think, it's acting like we don't have this control. It's like acting like we don't have any sort of role to play. I think that's the biggest thing, right? It's like, I see it all the time too with like people wanting somebody to tell them what to do because then they don't feel like responsible for whether it goes well or not, right? And it's like you're not living your life. And I think that's the thing, like learning to fail and make mistakes correctly is learning to live your own life and recognizing that it's just a part of it and that with each of those you get better, you learn. It's teachable moments, as they like to say, right? And I think that's really what matters the most. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a good point. It's a teachable moment. So, like, it's okay to lose. Don't lose the lesson, because
Yeah.
each failure has a lesson in it. And that's like the beauty of it, is that it's this system that's completely built that, like, if you don't get the outcome you want, there is a lesson in there to help you get that outcome that you want.
Well, and you know what's awesome? Like the cool thing too, I think that most people don't realize is we can fail a lot. We can make a ton of mistakes. I was listening to this podcast called Ear Hustle the other day where they talk about, they go into prisons and they talk like these are long-term prisoners. And this one prison has this program where some of these guys learn programming. And this one guy was in jail for like 20 years. Now he's out and he has a job with a tech company and he's doing good. Like, and yeah, he didn't have those opportunities before. And there was a lot of situational factors, of course, but like he failed huge. Like, right? He lost like 20 years of his life, but now he's doing something much better. And I think it's like you look at even those examples, some of the hardest ones sometimes to look at, because it's like, you realize, oh my God, like there is second chances. There is a way to make things better almost always. You just have to find it and you have to be willing to do it. And I think that's, that's the biggest
Yeah.
part, because when we convince ourselves that, we don't have to be, we also just stop doing things and stop trying to make the situation better.
Yeah, like you can mess your life up completely and you can always start anew today, as
Yeah.
difficult as it may seem, but there's always the opportunity to start anew. And another thing, so like in terms of failure, so one thing that I like to say about failure is try and limit the downside. So like with failures, as with like any type of risk, you want to try and increase the possible upside and limit the downside. So like failures in life could be heading to prison, and that's like a very, very bad failure, because that messes up a lot of stuff. But like
you lose time too, right?
Yeah,
a lot of time.
but like, so like nowadays, being an entrepreneur is very popular, and so like some people, they want to build a brick and mortar business, and that has a potentially a very heavy downside, because you got to pay rent, you got to pay employees, different stuff like that. But also we live in an age where there's a lot of digital things out there, very low overhead. So like the downside is a lot less for failing in that way, because what do you have to pay for? Like a, hosting provider or something like that.
Yeah.
It's really not that much. So like limiting your downside on failures, trying to fail fast. So like we said earlier, failure is feedback, and just trying to accumulate as much as you can. And then always failing forward. And this actually comes from kind of a mindset, recognizing that when you try, because you're going to fail, when you try again, you're not trying from the same place you tried from last time, because now you're a different person.
Point, yeah.
You've learned different lessons. The environment is different. So like realizing that you're failing forward, you're always moving forward, you're growing, you're becoming a better person. And then just getting that mentality that you're just going to keep on failing until you get there.
You said a lot of really good things in. I really wanted to just highlight a couple, like the limiting the downside. I love that, because you might want to start a business, you might want to do all these things. So look at how can I do it first in a way where I minimize risk, I minimize the dangers, because that way I also can learn a lot about myself. What do I need to do? Do I have the work ethic? Do I have the ability to make this work? Am I willing to put in this time? You learn a lot about yourself, and it's like, it really becomes just a moment to fail and learn, essentially, rather than, necessary success. And then that helps you get to that point where you can actually start building up to that greater thing. And then the other, I think, really crucial point you made is like, you're not, when you start again, when you come out of that failure, you're not starting from a blank slate, right? You never are. You carry all that information with you, all those tools, all that knowledge. And so you're in a better place already. You're already in a place where, okay, I know what failure looks like in this case. Now I can avoid that and move on. And I think that's such a good point, right?
Yeah, it's something that I learned from like a couple people who had gone from like rags to riches stories, how they had gotten really successful, and then people asked them, well, like, what happens if you lost it all? And they're like, it doesn't matter if I lose it all because I know how to make it. So like
Yeah.
I can lose everything, and I know that within a year or two I'll be right back where I am. And so like recognizing that you actually become that person that you want to be.
Well, I like that too because it's also like they know they can make it back, and they've also been in that situation before, but they're not going back to that situation without any of the knowledge of how to do it. And that's just the point, right? It's like, yeah, even if I lose it all, one, I've already been in that situation, so I know how to survive. I know I can survive it, and two, I've also been successful for a long time, so I know exactly. It's like you have all the knowledge. This is not new. You have connections. You have all this stuff. And I think this is what I think a great mistake people make about failure and mistake is that they act as if it's like they don't carry anything with them, and it's not a teachable moment. That they don't learn anything. They don't have new skills, and it's like you're always starting from zero because we talk like that. We say, oh, starting your life over. This idea that you have nothing. And it's like, well, no, you do have a lot of stuff. It's not, you don't. It's not nothing. And I think that's getting over that is hard though. I think I struggled with that myself. When I felt like I was starting over, it's like, oh shit, I have nothing. And it's like, well, wait, I do have stuff. I have lots of stuff. I have lots of skills. I have lots of abilities. I have lots of tools. I have lots of experiences, and all of that adds up to a lot of valuable information and valuable tools, right? I think
Yeah,
that's a great point.
definitely. And the other thing that I just want to touch on again is like limiting the downside. So
Yeah.
like so many people use this kind of as an excuse to not get started. Like they're like, well, I can't, I need to get a business loan for 100,000. Like, okay, so for instance, I knew somebody who wanted to start like a really awesome program that would help a lot of people out, but they thought they needed $1 million in order to start this program. And it was just like a big mental roadblock. That's all it was. Because
Yeah.
legitimately they could start a lot smaller than this vision that they had, but it was a vision that they'd been holding for years and years and years because they needed this $1 million, this magical number to actually start it. And because of that, it completely stopped them. And a lot of people let that stuff stop them where they're like, I need the degree, I need the business loan, I need like all these things that eventually are more liabilities than anything else. But they let that stop them instead of kind of being honest with themselves, like we talked about, and recognizing that, maybe they're just a little bit scared.
Yeah. And that's okay. It's okay to be scared, right? It's okay to be fearful, but you just got to embrace it. And I think like what you said there too, it's also about scalability, right? It's about understanding how to, plan and to start something small and work up to that bigger thing. McDonald's, they didn't start with 1,000 stores. You start with one. It's like you don't just jump into this huge franchise. You start with one thing and you build it up as you go. And you look at any successful business or even like websites, programs, all of that, they start out tiny and they work their way up because Facebook started out in a dorm room, and it wasn't. I think originally he had done it as like a way to rank attractiveness or something, and then it eventually turned into that, right? I mean, like just saying, it was a totally different thing originally. So
Yeah, dude, I love the story of Marie Callender. Like everybody knows her TV dinners and everything like that. She has some restaurants
yeah,
and
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, she started with one pie. She was working at a Greasy Spoon diner. It was going out of business. She needed the job. She said, let me bring in a pie. People love my pies. She brought in one pie. They sold the whole pie that day. The next day, she brought in two pies. After a while, people started asking if they could buy a pie. Before long, she made enough money to buy like a commercial oven and put it in her house. And then now she's like, she has hundreds of restaurants. She's in like every frozen food aisle, but it all started with one pie.
Yeah, it starts with an idea, right? It's actually just like it was Luna Bar started that way. I think the woman that started it, if I remember correctly, she had like it was like 2 or 3 nutrition bars that she had started with recipes, and like just they go from there. And it's I mean, I think if she started originally, like she was in like one Whole Foods, I think that she worked at or something that they let her sell it, and she was hand packaging them herself, like like it's like. And I think we don't see that side of it though. I think that's why people struggle so much. They don't see that side, and you imagine all the work and it seems insurmountable. But the reality is that day by day, it's totally doable. And I think that's what we forget all the time. Yeah.
Definitely. So any
It's a
other
lot.
ways to not fail like the government?
Yeah, keep trying.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't give up on yourself. I think that, it sounds stupid, but I think that's also like probably the easiest advice. Just don't give up on yourself. If you want to be something, you can be it. You just got to keep working at it.
Yeah, I heard something the other day. Gary Vaynerchuk he said the reason I'm patient is because I'm not trying to impress other people. And I realize I have my whole entire life to accomplish this. And that's a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
You know? And that's like I found that to be really good advice because like recently we've talked about this a few times, how like I feel a lot of pressure to get a lot of stuff done. And
Yeah.
it, like it kind of stresses me out because like, I feel like I don't have enough time to actually
Do
enjoy
anything you
hobbies
want
and
to do.
stuff
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And real seeing that because like it's kind of finding that balance because like on the one hand I realize that life is long, like really could potentially really long,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
potentially really long. On the other hand, you're here today, you're gone today, who knows? So like it's short, but trying to strike that balance, but also just hearing that kind of gave me the perspective to be like, okay, I got my whole entire life to accomplish this. I don't need to do it today, I don't need to do it tomorrow. Let's do a little piece. But
Yeah.
you
Well, I also like what he says too, right? Because you're not trying to impress other people. And if you are, you're probably doing the wrong thing. And you're probably living in the wrong way. And I think, that's the other thing where people make the mistake that fame and fortune is going to make them happy because a lot of times they think of it as like it's like a status thing and it's not about them. And I think that's really the important thing is it's got to be about you or it's just not going to work and you're going to be unhappy. I think that's a big mistake we all make. At first is trying to impress others rather than trying to impress ourselves and trying to live the life that we really want to live and finding that. And I think that, that's a huge part of it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I definitely saw a little bit of that myself, where it was like the amount of money to where I would never have to be able to work, never have to work again. Like that would be that's this goal that I'm going after. But it's like, I have
Yeah.
I have what I need today, and so
Yeah.
like that should be enjoyable, and then allow me to kind of enjoy life a bit more.
Well,
Oh, here's another way not to
go
fail
ahead.
like the government.
Go ahead.
Don't go into debt.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so like right now,
The
maybe you guys
government's
don't
in
know much.
ridiculous debt.
They're in
The
trouble.
most, yeah.
They're in,
Are we
yeah,
at,
they're in
we're over
ridiculous
40
debt.
trillion now, aren't we?
Dude, it printed more money in the past 2 years than they printed in the first
Hey, and don't
220
worry, because
some years of the U.S.
they're gonna sign a new like $4 trillion bill soon. Don't worry.
It's transitory. It's transitory.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
So like, the thing is, like, they're in trouble, and the thing is, like, they kind of got in over their head, and now because the rest of the world is going downhill as well, they kind of have to keep printing money, and so like it's devaluing their own money. But it is so. Anyways, don't go into debt. Like, and if you're in debt, get out of debt.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because look, we all face challenges in life, and we might not have the money we need right now. And certain things you do need. That's true. Like your car might break, and you need your car, right? That's fine. But like, I think I like that you said that too, because I think so many people go into debt to try and impress others for stupid things about status, for stupid things about like thinking like needing to have the newest phone. When let's face it, are you really using that phone to earn money to do anything with it? Like I think looking at your life that way and realizing what do I really need now and not going into unnecessary debt for stuff like that. Like that can be okay, I think, if it's correct and right, or if it's necessary to survive. I understand that, but like, yeah, it's a great point because again, it goes to that like trying to impress the Joneses when the Joneses don't give a shit about you.
Because it adds unnecessary stress to your life.
It does.
Like that,
and then,
like I said, that was one of the biggest mistakes I made was going into student debt. And like I like to say that I didn't know any better, but that was my own fault for being an 18-year-old and not knowing anything about money. Like I had 18
and making a choice like that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. I always think back to that. I'm like, man, I wish I didn't make that decision. But it's like I did. So now you gotta go forward, right? And that's the other thing. Just keep moving.
Yeah. Definitely. So I think that's a great way to not fail like the government. Don't go into debt. Or if you're in debt, look up Dave Ramsey. Figure your way out. You'll do it.
Budget and get out of it, right?
Yeah. Well, like budget is like a nasty word. People hate it.
Yeah.
Even though, dude, it's
take
like
control.
The most
liberating... I would say take control. Take control of your life and your spending. That's what it is. It's really what it is. Don't let others control. It's literally
the most liberating thing that anyone can. Like, here's a thing that nobody will tell you. Having a budget is literally the most liberating thing you can do with your money. Because up until then, you have no idea where your money goes. Like every week you get or every 2 weeks or every month you get a paycheck, And then you're like, where did that go? And then all of a
Dude,
sudden, like, you start budgeting it. And yeah, it's difficult for the first few weeks, the first few months. But then after that, it's automatic. And the coolest thing is, you're like, look at all this awesome leftover money that I have.
dude,
Whoa.
the amount of people I talk to that have services for software, for streaming services, for entertainment that they don't even use. And it's like, dude, that adds up, over the
Mm-hmm.
year to hundreds of dollars. And it's like, it's insane, and it's like, or thousands in some cases. So yeah, I think it's a great point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good place to end. Do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, just don't fail like the government.
Don't do it. Yeah.
Fail,
Don't do that.
fail. Listen, fail like a winner.
Yeah.
This is
Feel
okay.
like a
So like,
success.
this is why I read biographies, because somebody told me that Charlie Munger is one of the smartest guys on earth, and I want to learn from the smartest people. And one of the things that he does is he reads a ton of biographies, because you
Yeah.
can literally, it took somebody else 80 years to figure this out, and
Yeah.
you can learn it in 8 hours. And
Yeah.
so like, it's like the ultimate life hack, reading biographies. And so like, if you're going to fail, what you're going to have to do, fail like a success. That's where
And
we
you
should
can
end it.
enjoy it at the same time. Yeah, I like that. That's a good mic drop. All right. So don't feel like the government, episode 55, guys. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe, share with your friends. If you're listening, do the same. And then also check us out on the other services. We'll be back midweek with a short, quick fix. But until then, it was fun. Later, Randy.
Later, Danny.